The fog rolled in thick off the Pacific that October morning, the kind that swallowed sound and turned the world into something ghostly and uncertain. A silver sedan slowed as it approached the main gate of Naval Support Base Coronado, headlights cutting pale tunnels through the gray. The engine idled for a moment, then went silent. The woman who stepped out wore jeans faded from too many washes and a navy hoodie that had seen better years. Her boots were scuffed, the leather cracked at the toes. Over one shoulder she carried an old canvas sea bag, the kind they didn't issue anymore, with a name stenciled across the side in letters that had nearly worn away. Brennan. She stood there for a moment, letting the salt air fill her lungs, listening to the distant clang of metal on metal from the shipyard and the low groan of a foghorn somewhere out beyond the harbor. Her eyes were the color of winter sky, pale blue and sharp, and they moved across the gate, the guard booth, the concrete barriers with the kind of attention most people reserved for things that mattered. At the guard booth, Petty Officer Garrett Sloan leaned back in his chair, coffee going cold in a styrofoam cup beside him. He was 24, fresh-faced, the kind of young sailor who still thought the Navy was going to be an adventure. A Marine Lance Corporal stood outside the booth, rifle slung across his chest, sharing a joke that made them both grin. The woman approached without hurry. No rush, no hesitation, just steady forward motion like someone who knew exactly where she belonged. Sloan glanced up as she reached the window. His eyes skimmed over her civilian clothes, the plain duffel, the absence of anything that looked official. He took the ID she offered, scanned it without really reading it, and handed it back. "Another transfer from Norfolk," the Marine said, not quite under his breath. His name tape read, "Kowalski. Bet she's logistics. They always send logistics." Sloan grinned. "Hope she can type faster than the last one. That guy couldn't file a form to save his life." They laughed, the easy, thoughtless laughter of men who had seen 100 transfers come through and expected nothing different from number 101. The woman took her ID back, clipped it to her hoodie, and walked through the gate without a word. The fog swallowed her before she'd gone 20 yards. Behind her, Kowalski shook his head. "Another paper pusher," he said. "Give her 2 weeks before she's crying about the workload." Sloan raised his coffee in mock salute. 3 weeks. I'm feeling generous." Neither of them saw the way her jaw had set as she walked away. Neither of them noticed the way her eyes cataloged every detail. The rusted hinge on the secondary gate, the security camera angled 10 degrees too low, the paint peeling off the welcome sign that hadn't been touched up in years. They didn't know that the woman walking into their base had flown combat missions in the Persian Gulf, that she had commanded a strike group through a narrow choke point under fire and brought every ship home, that she held the Navy Cross for valor in the face of enemy action and had written half the tactical protocols the fleet now used as gospel. They didn't know her name was Catherine Brennan, that she was a Rear Admiral, or that in 7 days she would stand before them in dress whites with 2 stars on her shoulders and watch their faces drain of color. They didn't know any of it, and that was exactly the way she wanted it. Catherine walked through the base with the measured pace of someone who had nowhere urgent to be and all the time in the world to get there. The fog thinned as the sun climbed higher, burning off in patches that left the mornings sharp and clear. Buildings rose on either side of the main road, blocky and utilitarian, painted in shades of gray that matched the overcast sky. She passed a group of junior sailors clustered near a smoking area, their voices carrying on the wind. One of them glanced her way, saw the civilian clothes, and looked right through her. Good, she thought. Invisible was exactly what she needed to be. The headquarters building stood 3 stories tall, all right angles and narrow windows, the kind of architecture designed by someone who believed function mattered more than form. The glass doors didn't quite shine, dulled by salt air and indifference. Inside, the lobby hummed with the low-grade chaos of a command center that had stopped pretending to be organized. Phones rang unanswered. A printer jammed and spat out half a page before giving up entirely. Somewhere down a side corridor, Someone was arguing about a requisition that had been lost for the third time. A television in the corner played a training video from 1997, the tape grainy and unwatched. Catherine moved to the reception desk where a young petty officer sat hunched over a keyboard, fingers moving in the desperate rhythm of someone drowning in spreadsheets. His name tag read, Harris. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. An energy drink sat at his elbow, half empty and going flat. "Ma'am?" he asked without looking up, fingers still typing. "Transfer from Norfolk," Catherine said, her voice quiet, unremarkable. "Reporting as ordered." She slid the manila folder across the desk. The orders inside had been scrubbed clean by careful hands in Washington, stripped of anything that might raise eyebrows or trigger questions. What remained looked like standard paperwork for a mid-grade officer nobody had heard of and nobody would remember. Harris skimmed the first page, eyes flicking over her name, Monroe, Catherine J., without stopping. The classification codes were gone. The routing through Comnaver headquarters was gone. What was left could have been anyone. "Right," he muttered. "1 second." He picked up the phone, punched in extension. "Yeah, Captain Stratton's office. Got your new transfer down here." Pause. "Yeah, admin track. You want me to send her up now?" Pause. "Cool." He hung up, slid her a base access card that looked like it had been printed on a machine from the previous decade, and jerked his chin toward the hallway. "3rd floor, office of Captain David Stratton. End of the corridor, door on the right. He'll get you situated." "Thank you," Catherine said. Harris was already answering another ringing line before she turned away. The elevator creaked and groaned on its way up, the kind of sound that suggested deferred maintenance in budget cuts. Catherine watched her reflection in the dull metal doors. No insignia, no rank on her shoulders, just the quiet face of a woman in her mid-30s who had learned a long time ago that the hardest battles were the ones you fought without anyone knowing you were fighting. She thought about her father. Commander Jack Brennan had walked through a gate just like this one, 34 years ago, carrying his own sea bag and his own quiet confidence. He'd flown F/A-18 Hornets off carriers in the Gulf, back when the world was holding its breath and waiting to see if Saddam Hussein would blink first. He never came home. Catherine had been 3 years old the day her mother sat her down in front of the television and tried to explain what the news anchor was saying. She didn't remember her father's face, not really. What she remembered was the sound of her mother crying and the way the television screen felt cold when she pressed her hand against it. The elevator doors slid open on the 3rd floor. Captain David Stratton's office looked like a man slowly losing a war against paperwork. Stacks of files leaned at precarious angles across his desk. A half-empty mug of coffee sat beside his right hand, the liquid inside gone cold hours ago. The walls were bare except for a single framed photograph and a display case holding an old rifle. Stratton himself was 51, with the kind of weathered face that came from 30 years of service and not enough sleep. His uniform was crisp, his ribbons aligned to regulation, but the skin under his eyes sagged with exhaustion. He didn't look up when Catherine knocked. "Come in," he said, flat and distracted. Catherine stepped inside and closed the door behind her. Stratton finished signing whatever form he'd been working on, stamped it with more force than necessary, and finally glanced up. His eyes moved over her the way they might move over furniture, cataloging, categorizing, dismissing. "You the transfer?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Administrative support. Reporting as ordered." He picked up the single sheet of paper that represented her orders and scanned it without interest. "Monroe," he said aloud, more to himself than to her. "All right, Monroe. Welcome to Coronado. You'll be working in the logistics office. Major Kincaid will be your immediate supervisor." "Yes, sir." "You familiar with the new requisition system?" "I have some experience with it, sir." Something in her tone must have registered, because Stratton's eyes flicked up to meet hers for half a second. Then the moment passed, and he was looking back at the paperwork. "Good," he muttered. It's a disaster. We're months behind on key items. The motor pool is screaming, communications is half dead, and higher headquarters is breathing down my neck about readiness metrics. He shook his head. You can start by not quitting in the first month. Major Kincaid is sharp, but she's running on fumes. She doesn't need another person folding when the work piles up. Catherine kept her expression neutral, her voice calm. I don't quit easily, sir. This time Stratton did look at her, really look, for a full 3 seconds. Something flickered in his eyes. Curiosity, maybe, or suspicion, but it passed before it could take root. Logistics is down the hall, he said. Room 23. Report to Major Grace Kincaid. She'll show you the rest. Catherine nodded. It wasn't the sharp, practiced nods she used in flag briefings. It was smaller, softer, the kind of acknowledgement that blended into the background and left no impression. She turned to leave, then paused. Her eyes had caught on the display case mounted on the wall beside Stratton's desk. Inside, lit by a small overhead bulb, sat an M40A6 sniper rifle. The wood stock was worn smooth by handling, the metal components clean, but showing the patina of age. Your rifle, sir? She asked. Stratton glanced at it, and for a moment something almost like pride crossed his face. My father's, he said. He was a Marine sniper. Gulf War, 1991. He used to say that was the last time standards really mattered in the military. His voice carried the weight of old disappointment. Back when people cared about doing the job right. Catherine looked at the rifle, at the photograph on the wall behind Stratton's desk. It showed Naval Air Station Coronado in the early 1980s, back during the Cold War buildup when the base had mattered, when ships lined the docks and aircraft crowded the tarmac, and the whole place hummed with purpose. When this base meant something, Stratton continued, following her gaze. Now it's just a parking lot for broken ships and broken systems. He waved a hand dismissively. Anyway, room 23, Major Kincaid is waiting. Catherine left without another word. That night, alone in the temporary quarters they'd assigned her, a small room with a narrow bed and a window that looked out over the harbor, Catherine pulled an encrypted satellite phone from the bottom of her sea bag. The device was military-grade, an AN/PRC-152, the kind of equipment that didn't exist on any official inventory. She dialed a number from memory and waited. 3 rings, then a voice, rough as gravel and warm as bourbon. How bad is it, Cat? Admiral William Harrison was 71 years old and had more salt water in his veins than most ships had in their bilges. He'd started his career on Cold War submarines in the 1970s, hunting Soviet boomers under the Arctic ice. He'd ended it as a 4-star admiral commanding the Pacific Fleet. In between, he'd done just about everything the Navy could ask of a man, and then some. He was also the one who had designed this operation, who had sat with Catherine in a secure room in the Pentagon 6 weeks ago and laid out the plan like a chess game. Worse than the intel suggested, Catherine said quietly. She sat on the edge of the bed, the phone pressed to her ear. Through the window, she could see the dark shapes of ships at anchor, running lights glowing like scattered stars. This isn't just neglect, Hawk. It's rot. The whole system is breaking down and nobody seems to care anymore. Harrison was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of experience and something deeper, memory maybe, or regret. Your father and I served together on the USS Missouri, he said. Did I ever tell you that? You did, sir, several times. 1990, right before Desert Storm kicked off. We were battleship sailors, Cat. We knew every rivet, every system, every gauge and valve on that ship. We had to. Our lives depended on it. He paused. These kids today, they don't know their own ships. They don't know their own gear. And the ones who do know are drowning because nobody above them gives a damn. Catherine closed her eyes. I saw a requisition today for M4 carbine parts, for SEAL team training. 6-month backlog. 6 months, Harrison repeated. and she could hear the disgust in his voice. I know those parts, Hawk. I know what they cost and how long they take to ship, and exactly how many rounds those teams fire in a standard training cycle. There's no excuse for 6 months. Unless someone's skimming. Unless someone's skimming, she agreed. Another silence. In the background on Harrison's end, Catherine could hear the faint sounds of Washington at night. Traffic, distant sirens, the low hum of a city that never quite slept. You remember what I told you when we started this? Harrison asked. You said I wasn't just fixing a base. I was saving careers, maybe lives. That's right, and I meant it. His voice softened just slightly. Your father believed in the mission, Kat. He believed that the Navy stood for something bigger than any one person. Honor, duty, taking care of your people. A pause. He died believing that. Don't let him down. Catherine opened her eyes and looked at the photograph she'd placed on the small desk beside the bed. Commander Jack Brennan, in his flight suit, standing in front of an FA-18, grinning like a man who loved every second of what he did. He'd been 32 in that photo. He'd had 2 weeks left to live. I won't, she said quietly. Good, now get some sleep. Tomorrow you start earning their trust. The line went dead. Catherine set the phone aside and lay back on the narrow bed, staring up at the ceiling. Outside, the fog was rolling in again, thick and cold, turning the harbor into a place of shadows and whispers. She thought about her father walking through that gate in 1990. She thought about tomorrow, and she closed her eyes and waited for the morning. The logistics office was exactly what Catherine had expected. Controlled chaos held together by willpower and caffeine. Rows of desks filled the room, each one occupied by a sailor or civilian clerk wearing the same expression of exhausted determination. Computer monitors glowed with spreadsheets that never ended. Phone lines blinked with calls on hold. Boxes of unfiled paperwork lined the walls like sandbags holding back a flood. At the center of it all stood Major Grace Kincaid. She was 39, with dark hair pulled into a bun that looked like it had been assembled in a moving vehicle, and eyes that missed nothing. Her uniform was pressed, her posture straight, but the lines under her eyes told the story of too many 16-hour days and not enough help. She held a tablet in one hand and a folder in the other, eyes moving from one workstation to the next, with the intensity of someone juggling more tasks than gravity allowed. Ma'am, Catherine said, approaching quietly, administrative transfer, reporting to you. Kincaid turned, glanced at the orders Captain Stratton had sent ahead, and exhaled a breath that might have been relief or resignation. Monroe, she said, all right, we're glad to have you. We lost 2 people to burnout last month and 1 to a promotion, so consider yourself thrown into the deep end from day 1. From a desk near the window, a young sergeant leaned back in his chair and grinned. His name tape read Merrick. He was maybe 29, with a kind of easy confidence that came from never having been truly tested. Hope she can type faster than the last one, ma'am, he said. The words carried just enough edge to draw quiet laughter from a couple of nearby clerks. Or at least not cry in the bathroom on day 3. Kincaid shot him a look that could have stripped paint off a bulkhead. Sergeant Merrick, she said, her voice cold and precise. You want to run the incoming priority queue today? Merrick's grin vanished. No, ma'am. Then get back to work. He turned to his screen, suddenly very interested in whatever spreadsheet he'd been ignoring. Catherine didn't flinch. She'd heard sharper words thrown across steel decks in the middle of the night when missiles were in the air, and decisions had to be made in seconds. The difference was out there, the people throwing those words usually understood what was at stake. Here, people were bleeding frustration into jokes because no one had shown them another way. You can start over here, Kincaid said, motioning Catherine toward an empty desk. Log in with this guest account until IT processes your credentials. We'll put you on inbound requisitions and tracking misrouted shipments. If you see something that makes no sense, flag it. Don't assume it's your mistake. Odds are the mistake started 3 months ago and 6 layers up. Yes, ma'am, Catherine said. She set her duffel beside the chair, slid into the seat, and let her fingers rest lightly on the keyboard. The screen blinked awake, filling with lines of numbers and codes. Behind each one was a unit somewhere, waiting on something they needed to do their job. She began to work. She didn't complain, didn't try to impress anyone with stories or rank or clever comments. She just listened, watched, took in the rhythm of the office like someone learning the heartbeat of a ship. She watched the way Kincaid moved through the room, calm and efficient, even when the systems around her were failing. She watched Merrick mutter under his breath when a form bounced back for the third time. She watched a civilian clerk rub her temples every time she opened an email from the supply office. And through the windows, she could see the tops of cranes over the harbor, the silhouettes of ships at berth, idle vehicles in the lot near the pier, some missing tires, some with hoods propped open to the sky, delayed repairs, deferred maintenance, symptoms of a sickness that ran deeper than anyone wanted to admit. By late afternoon, Kincaid sent her to a coordination meeting. "Just observe," the major said, handing her a folder. "Take notes. You'll learn more about how things actually work in one meeting than in a week of reading manuals." The conference room was cramped and smelled like old coffee and recycled air. Officers filed in and took seats around a table that had seen better decades. Captain Aaron Mills, the operations officer, flipped through a printed agenda and frowned at whatever he saw there. "Again with the new admin procedures," he muttered. He was mid-40s, competent enough, but worn down by years of fighting the same battles. "Every time we get a new batch of transfer clerks, the whole schedule turns to mud." A lieutenant commander across the table nodded. "They come in, rewrite the flow, then ditch us for some neat job at headquarters. Meanwhile, we're out here trying to guess which form to use this week." Catherine sat against the wall, pen poised above her notepad, expression neutral. She listened as they complained about deployment readiness codes, about new protocols that made no sense, about systems designed by people who had never moved a real unit in the real world. "Look at this," Mills said, tapping a section of the document. "New tactical integration standards. Another clever idea from someone who's never had to coordinate actual operations." He laughed, and a few others joined in automatically. It was easier to mock a faceless author than to ask why no one at their level had been in the room when the system was redesigned. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that Catherine had been in that room. She had written the draft version of the protocols they were complaining about, sitting in a windowless office 3,000 miles away, working from midnight until dawn because she couldn't sleep and the work needed doing. She had argued for simpler language, clearer priorities, fewer signatures. She had fought committees and bureaucrats and officers who wanted their names on the final product. What had come out the other end, after months of compromise and revision, was heavier than she'd wanted. But it was still better than what had been there before. On paper, anyway. In this room, the words lived a different life. Catherine wrote down their complaints, not to defend herself later, but to understand where the theory met the ground and broke apart. She noted every frustration, every suggestion, every bitter joke about desk warriors who didn't understand the real Navy. And when the meeting ended and the officers filed out, still grumbling, she slipped out with the rest of the support staff. One more silent figure carrying a folder no one wanted to read. The mess hall at midday was louder, but the script barely changed. Long tables stretched across a room that smelled like coffee that had been on the warmer too long, and food that had been cooked in industrial quantities. Catherine moved through the serving line with a tray in her hand, listening to the voices around her, filtering signal from noise. At a table near the windows, two SEAL instructors in their 40s sat with their backs to the harbor, voices low but carrying. "You see the new drill schedule?" one asked. His name tape read, Palmer. "Whoever came up with this has never tried to coordinate operator sleep cycles with live fire rotations." The other snorted. "Yeah, I'd love to meet the genius who thinks we can run full mission profiles and still hit training hours equipment maintenance, and inspection windows. His name was Rodriguez. Must be nice to live in theory land where ammunition allocates itself and nobody ever gets tired. Catherine paused, her hand hovering over the coffee pot. That schedule they were mocking? She diagrammed the first version of it on a whiteboard 2 years ago, trying to build something that would push readiness without breaking the operators. She'd run the numbers, accounted for fatigue, built-in recovery time. Then it had gone up the chain and come back down with half the recovery time cut and twice the requirements added. She poured herself half a cup and moved on. They never looked up from their complaints long enough to see the woman passing 3 feet away. The one who had once stood in a watch center at 0300, rewriting those same schedules on the fly while destroyers moved through narrow waters and every decision mattered. Catherine found a seat alone at a table near the far wall, not isolated, just out of the current. Fork in one hand, pen in the other, she ate and wrote, building a map of a base that had more frustration than direction. She was beginning to understand what needed fixing, and more importantly, she was beginning to understand why it had broken in the first place. The afternoon of Catherine's third day brought her to the motor pool, where the real work of the base was supposed to happen, but mostly didn't. Major Kincaid had handed her a stack of requisition slips that morning, each one flagged with increasing levels of urgency. "Take these down to Master Chief Dalton," Kincaid had said, exhaustion making her voice flat. "See if you can get someone to actually sign them. And if he gives you trouble, just smile and wait him out. Eventually he'll realize you're not going anywhere." The motor pool sprawled across 2 acres of cracked asphalt and weathered buildings. It smelled like oil and hot rubber and old exhaust, the scent of machines being pushed past their limits and barely holding together. Rows of vehicles lined the bays, some elevated on lifts, others pulled apart with their components laid out like organs on metal trays. Master Chief Marcus Dalton stood in the middle of it all, like a captain on a sinking ship who refused to abandon his post. He was 46, built solid from 3 decades of working with his hands, with grease permanently stained into the creases of his palms. He wore coveralls that had been navy blue once, but had faded to something closer to gray. Around his left wrist was a memorial bracelet, the kind that never came off. Engraved on the steel band was a name, CPO, Robert Dalton, Beirut, 1983, his father. Catherine waited while Dalton finished chewing out a young petty officer for using the wrong torque setting on a wheel assembly. The dressing down was professional, precise, and left no room for argument. When it was done, the petty officer scurried off, and Dalton turned his attention to Catherine. "Ma'am?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag that only spread the grease around. Catherine stepped forward and handed him the requisitions. "Master Chief needs signatures to move these up the chain." Dalton took the forms, scanned the first page, and snorted. It was not a sound of amusement. "Let me guess," he said, "more promises from logistics that the parts are definitely, absolutely coming this time." "Requisitions to confirm," Catherine said calmly. "If we get these signed today, we can move them up faster." He flipped through the stack, eyes catching on serial numbers and quantities that clearly meant something to him. Then he shook his head and pushed the clipboard back at her. "I'm not signing this," he said. His voice wasn't angry, just tired. Tired in the way that comes from fighting the same battle for years and never winning. "You clerks have no idea what it means when these vehicles sit. You want me to certify that we're good with parts we don't have, so somebody up the chain can check a box and call it done?" Around them, mechanics paused in their work, listening. A few exchanged glances. They'd wanted to say the same thing for months, but hadn't had the rank to get away with it. "Here's a tip," Dalton continued, looking at Catherine with the weariness of a man who had explained this too many times. "Rookies shouldn't be the ones closing out these requests. You need to understand what happens when fleet vehicles don't move before you touch the paperwork." Catherine held his gaze without flinching. She let the silence stretch for 3 full seconds, long enough for the mechanics to wonder if she was going to fold or fight back. She did neither. "Master Chief," she said quietly. What's the actual status on the Mark V patrol boats? Dalton blinked. What? The Mark V's, special operations craft. You have 6 of them here for maintenance rotation. Catherine's voice stayed level, almost casual. I'm asking what the real status is, not what's on the board, what you know. For the first time, something shifted in Dalton's expression. Suspicion, maybe, or recognition that this wasn't a normal conversation with a normal clerk. How do you know we have Mark V's? He asked slowly. Because I commanded a patrol group in the Persian Gulf, Catherine said. 6 boats, ran interdiction operations for 18 months. I know what systems fail first on those hulls, Master Chief. I know which parts are critical and which ones you can jury-rig in a pinch. And I know that if you're sitting on Mark V's with a 6-month backlog on parts, something is very wrong with the supply chain. The motor pool had gone quiet. Even the sounds of work had stopped. Dalton stared at her like he was trying to solve a puzzle that had too many pieces missing. You're not a clerk, he said finally. I'm whatever this base needs me to be right now, Catherine replied. But what I'm asking you is this. What do you need on paper so we can stop pretending the parts are somewhere they're not? Dalton looked down at the requisitions again. This time, when he picked up his pen, his movements were deliberate, careful. He made notes in the margins, refusing to let anything slide for the sake of convenience. We need accurate status on back orders, he said as he wrote. Not optimistic estimates. We need someone to stop letting supply mark things as in transit for 4 weeks when they're sitting in a warehouse somewhere. And we need leadership to understand that a vehicle sitting dead on this lot isn't just a number on a spreadsheet. It's a mission that won't launch when we need it. Catherine nodded slowly. All right, she said, then let's start there. When she left the motor pool 20 minutes later, Dalton stood watching her go. One of his mechanics approached, a staff sergeant named Diaz, who had been working the bays since before most of the junior sailors were born. Chief, Diaz said quietly, who the hell is that? Dalton shook his head, still staring after her. I don't know, but she's not what they told us she was. That evening, Catherine returned to the logistics office to find most of the desks empty, the day shift having fled for whatever passed as rest. But in the far corner, under the flickering glow of an old fluorescent fixture, Seaman First Class Dylan Thatcher sat hunched over his computer like a man drowning in deep water. He was 22, skinny in the way that suggested he forgot to eat when he was stressed, with dark circles under his eyes that matched Harris at the front desk. When Catherine approached, he didn't look up at first, just kept clicking through screens, his breathing quick and shallow. Seaman Thatcher? Catherine said gently. He jumped, nearly knocking over his coffee. Ma'am, sorry, I didn't hear you. It's late. You should have secured hours ago. Thatcher laughed, but there was no humor in it. Yeah, I should have secured 3 weeks ago. He rubbed his face with both hands. Ma'am, I think I messed up. Some of the old data entries are wrong, and now the new system is flagging everything. Every time I fix something, 3 more errors pop up. I've been staying late every night trying to catch up, but I just keep falling further behind. He looked at her with the desperate eyes of someone who was certain he was about to get blamed for a disaster he didn't create. I don't think Major Kincaid knows how bad it is, he continued, and if she finds out, I'm done. They'll probably send me to deck division or something. Catherine pulled over a chair and sat down beside him. Show me. For the next 4 hours, they worked side by side. Catherine traced the error patterns, spotted where the training manual didn't match the actual system behavior, and identified the root cause buried 3 layers deep in a database migration that had gone wrong months before Thatcher had even arrived. She created a simple checklist he could follow, breaking the overwhelming mass of corrections into manageable pieces. She showed him shortcuts in the system that weren't in any manual, the kind of institutional knowledge that only came from actually building the databases in the first place. By the time the clock crept past midnight, the worst of the backlog was under control. Thatcher leaned back in his chair, exhausted but no longer panicking. Ma'am, you didn't have to stay. Most people would have just told me to figure it out. Or they would have gone straight to the major and told her I was slow. Catherine shook her head. Everyone's fast when the system makes sense, she said quietly. You weren't the problem, Seaman. The system didn't give you a fair start. He looked at her for a long moment, something like gratitude mixed with confusion on his face. Who are you, ma'am? I mean, where did you transfer from? Norfolk, Catherine said, which was true but told him nothing. Get some sleep, you've earned it. She left him there, still staring at his screen, but this time with hope instead of despair. On the morning of her fourth day, Catherine made a mistake. It was a small mistake, the kind that shouldn't have mattered. But in an operation built on staying invisible, small mistakes were the ones that brought everything down. She was in the break room, pouring coffee that tasted like it had been brewed during the previous administration, when two sailors came in arguing about the best ramen shops in Japan. They were aviation mechanics, young and loud, debating the merits of Tokyo versus Yokosuka with the passion of people who had strong opinions and no one to share them with. One of them turned to Catherine as she stirred powdered creamer into her cup. Hey, ma'am, you ever been stationed out that way? The question was casual, innocent, the kind of small talk that happened 100 times a day on any military base. Catherine's brain, running on 4 hours of sleep and muscle memory from years of service, answered before her operational discipline could stop it. She responded in Japanese, fluent, natural Japanese, with a particular accent and phrasing that came from living in Yokosuka, not just visiting. The kind of Japanese you learn from eating at hole-in-the-wall restaurants and arguing with port officials and standing watch on the bridge of a ship in Japanese waters. Both sailors blinked at her. Damn, ma'am, one of them said. You sound like a local. How long were you stationed there? And that's when Catherine felt the temperature in the room change. She turned and saw Lieutenant Commander James Vance standing in the doorway, coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips, staring at her with the expression of a man who had just seen a ghost. Vance was 44, with the weathered look of an officer who had spent most of his career at sea. He was supposed to be bitter about Catherine's arrival, about losing the command he'd expected. But right now, he just looked shocked. Once upon a time, Catherine said to the sailors, her voice deliberately light. Then she walked past Vance and out of the break room, feeling his eyes track her every step. She made it 50 yards down the corridor before she heard footsteps behind her. Admiral Brennan. Catherine stopped, closed her eyes for half a second, then turned to face him. Vance had followed her into an empty side hallway, away from the foot traffic of the main corridor. His face was a careful mask, but his eyes were sharp and calculating. Commander, Catherine said quietly, USS Blue Ridge, Yokosuka, 2020. Vance's voice was low, controlled. I briefed you on regional operations in the Pacific. You were visiting from Fleet Command. I remember that accent. I remember the way you corrected my pronunciation of the harbor master's name. Catherine said nothing. I was supposed to get this command, Vance continued. His voice was still quiet, but something harder ran beneath it. 22 years I've served. 22 years of doing everything right, following every order, taking every lousy assignment they gave me, and then Washington sends you. He stepped closer, not threatening, just intense. What are you doing here? What is this? Some kind of investigation? Are you building a case to fire us all? To shut down the base? I'm seeing what my reforms look like when they hit real sailors, Catherine said. I'm seeing what actually works and what doesn't. Vance laughed, a sound with no warmth in it. Your reforms, that's rich. You know what your reforms look like from down here? Like more work, more forms, more systems designed by people who haven't stood a watch in years. Then tell me how to fix them. Why should I? Vance's jaw was tight. Why should I help you do whatever it is you're doing? You're lying to everyone on this base, walking around in civilian clothes, pretending to be something you're not. And when you finally put on your stars and take command, what happens to those of us you've been lying to? Catherine held his gaze. I haven't lied, Commander. I just haven't worn the uniform yet. That's a distinction without a difference. Is it? Catherine's voice stayed calm. You know what I've learned in 4 days? I've learned that Major Kincaid is working 80-hour weeks because no one above her cares enough to fix a broken supply system. I've learned that Master Chief Dalton has vehicles deadlined because parts that were ordered months ago keep vanishing. I've learned that good people are burning out because the system is designed to make them fail. She paused, then continued more softly. I've also learned about your brother, Commander. Afghanistan, 2010. Marine Corps infantry officer. Killed in action waiting for a medevac that was delayed because someone up the chain didn't check the details. Vance's face went very still. I'm not here to destroy people, Catherine said. I'm here to fix the system that killed your brother. The system that's killing morale and readiness, and the kind of excellence your brother died believing in. They stood in silence for a long moment. Somewhere down the corridor, a phone rang and went unanswered. What do you want from me? Vance asked finally. Time, Catherine said. And if this goes sideways, back up. Vance studied her face, searching for something. Trust, maybe, or honesty, or just a reason to believe that one more flag officer might actually give a damn. You get one chance, he said. You blow this and I'll make sure everyone knows who you really are. Fair enough. He turned to leave, then stopped. For what it's worth, Admiral, that thing you did in the Gulf in 2021, bringing those ships home through that choke point, that was the kind of command my brother would have respected. Then he was gone, leaving Catherine alone in the empty hallway. That night, Catherine sat in her quarters and made a phone call she'd been dreading. Harrison answered on the first ring. Tell me. Vance knows, Catherine said. Recognize me from Yokosuka. Silence on the other end. Then, is he going to burn you? I don't think so, but I'm not sure. Kat, if he exposes you before you're ready, this whole operation falls apart. I know. Can you trust him? Catherine thought about the way Vance had looked at her when she mentioned his brother. The pain that had flickered across his face, old and deep and never quite healed. I think so, she said. He's angry. He has every right to be, but I think he wants to believe in something again. That's a hell of a risk to take. It's the same risk you took on me, Hawk. You could have told me no when I proposed this operation. You could have said it was too dangerous, too uncertain, but you didn't. Harrison was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. Your father took risks too, calculated ones, the kind where you weigh the odds and then you commit fully. A pause. Just make sure you're ready to commit, Kat, because once this storm hits, there's no turning back. I'm ready. Good, because according to the weather reports, you've got about 72 hours before a major coastal system moves in. If that supply flight is coming, it's coming right into the teeth of it. Catherine looked out her window at the clear night sky, at the stars scattered like broken glass across the darkness. Somewhere out there, a storm was building, and when it arrived, everything would change. I'll be ready, she said again. She hung up and sat in the darkness, thinking about her father flying through storms over the Gulf, thinking about Vance's brother bleeding out in Afghanistan, thinking about all the people who had died believing that someone up the chain actually cared. On her 5th day, Catherine visited the communications hub. Senior Chief Daniel Whitmore met her at the door with the wary expression of a man who had learned not to expect help from headquarters. The air inside hummed with machines working too hard, carrying loads they weren't designed for. Cables snaked along walls like vines, some labeled, most not. Whitmore was 38, lean and intense, with the focused energy of someone who understood that when communications failed, people died. You from logistics? He asked. Yes, Senior Chief. Trying to understand what we're breaking on your side. He barked a short laugh. Where do you want to start? He walked her through the hub, pointing out systems that were past their recommended replacement dates. Backup equipment cannibalized from older installations. Relay stations running at 60% capacity. Half our primary gear is from the 1990s, he said, gesturing at a rack of equipment with lights flickering in patterns that look more like warnings than normal operation. The AN/SRC-52 relay stations were top of the line when Clinton was president. Now they're held together with hope and bypass circuits. Catherine moved closer, examining the circuit boards. She could see the bulging capacitors, the discolored components, the voltage regulation systems that were clearly failing. These capacitors are shot, she said, pointing. Voltage regulation is degraded. You're probably running at 60% power efficiency, maybe less. Whitmore stared at her. How do you know electronics? Cross-trained with Navy EOD, Catherine said, which was true. You can't defuse a bomb if you don't understand circuits. She pulled out her notebook and started making detailed notes, sketching the equipment layout, marking specific components. Whitmore watched her work with growing interest. Senior Chief, where's the replacement antenna relay that was ordered 4 months ago? Catherine asked, tapping a specific part number in her notes. Whitmore checked his maintenance logs. Shows delivered, signed for by Captain Hastings in supply. But it's not installed. No, ma'am, we never received it. Catherine wrote that down carefully, underlining it twice. Another piece of a pattern that was becoming clearer every day. If one more component goes down, Whitmore said quietly, we won't have redundancy. One lightning strike, one power surge, one bad day, and this base will be deaf when it matters most. Catherine looked at the failing equipment, at the junior technicians trying to keep ancient systems running through skill and determination alone. She thought about what would happen if this gear failed during an emergency, during a crisis when lives depended on clear communication. What do you need most urgently? She asked. Whitmore gave her a list of part numbers. Catherine wrote them all down, not as a clerk covering a checklist, but as someone quietly assembling a picture of exactly where this base would fail the moment the seas turned rough. When she left the communications hub, word had already started to spread. The new logistics transfer knew things she shouldn't know, asked questions that went deeper than paperwork, seemed to understand systems from the inside out. People were starting to wonder, and Catherine let them wonder, because in 3 days the storm would hit, and wondering would turn to certainty, and everything she had built in silence would come crashing into the light. The storm came in low and fast on Catherine's 7th day, the way trouble always does when people are already tired and the margins are already thin. By late afternoon, the sky had turned the color of old iron, and the wind off the Pacific carried the smell of rain and salt and something electric that made the hair stand up on the back of your neck. Catherine stood at the logistics office window, watching the first sheets of rain blur the outlines of ships in the harbor. The weather report had called it a strong coastal system. Nothing unusual, nothing they hadn't seen before. But she had checked the extended forecast on her encrypted tablet that morning, and she knew what was really coming. Wind gusts up to 70 miles per hour, visibility near zero, lightning strikes every 30 seconds in the worst cells, the kind of storm that found every weakness in your systems and exploited them without mercy. Behind her, the office phones kept ringing. The printers kept jamming. Requisitions kept crawling through the system like wounded animals. Nobody was slowing down for weather. Nobody had time to slow down. Major Kincaid appeared at Catherine's desk, a tablet in one hand and exhaustion written across her face like a headline. Monroe, we've got a C-130 inbound tonight, she said. High-priority cargo. Mission kits for the SEAL teams. Communications replacement parts. Some of the equipment Master Chief Dalton has been screaming about for months. If the weather holds, it lands just before midnight. And if the weather doesn't hold? Catherine asked quietly. Kincaid's jaw tightened. Then we lose another week minimum, and Command already thinks we're a problem base. One more missed delivery, one more readiness failure, and they'll start talking about decommissioning Coronado entirely. 30 years of history, thousands of careers, all of it gone because we couldn't keep the supply chain moving. She handed Catherine a manifest. I need you to verify every item on this list. Make sure the documentation is clean, the item codes are correct, everything is ready so the moment that aircraft touches down, we can get the cargo offloaded and signed for. No excuses, no delays. Yes, ma'am. Kincaid started to leave, then paused. Monroe, I don't know where you transferred from or what your background is, but in the last week you've worked harder and smarter than people who've been here for months. Thank you. Catherine nodded, not trusting herself to say anything that wouldn't give too much away. By 1900 hours, the storm was fully on them. Rain hammered the windows hard enough to make the glass rattle. Thunder rolled across the base in waves that you felt in your chest. The lights flickered once, steadied, then flickered again as the building's electrical systems fought to compensate for voltage surges. Catherine worked through the manifest with the focused intensity of someone who understood that details mattered, that one missing signature or incorrect item code could cascade into disaster. She wanted every document perfect, every number verified, so there would be no excuse for this cargo to vanish into some bureaucratic black hole. Around her, people were saving their work, backing up files, preparing for the possibility that the power might not hold. Someone down the hall swore as a network connection dropped. A printer died mid-page and refused to restart. Then came the sound, a long descending beep from somewhere deeper in the building, electronic and urgent and wrong. At first it blended with the storm noise, just another part of the chaos. Then it repeated, longer and louder, the kind of alarm that meant something critical had just failed. Kincaid came out of her office fast, phone already at her ear. What do you mean the tower just lost primary communications? Her voice was sharp, controlled, but Catherine could hear the edge of panic underneath. The redundancies are supposed to handle a surge like that. When? Pause. All right, we're coming down. She hung up and looked across the office. Monroe, with me, now. They ran through corridors that flickered with unstable lighting, Catherine's boots striking the floor in rhythm with Kincaid's. Other personnel were moving too, heading toward the communications hub, drawn by the same alarm that said something had gone very wrong. The hub was chaos. Senior Chief Whitmore stood at the main console, headset around his neck, barking into a landline with barely controlled fury. Screens that should have glowed with stable green indicators were instead crowded with yellow and red warnings. Data feeds that should have flowed smoothly were frozen or jittering like the heartbeat of something dying. A young airman sat at a secondary console, fingers flying across the keyboard, trying emergency restart procedures that clearly weren't working. His face was pale and his hands were shaking. I don't care what the software says, Whitmore snapped into the phone. I'm telling you the relay is not holding. We have an aircraft inbound, and the tower cannot maintain clear channels with this interference. If we lose this link in this weather, we are flying blind. He slammed the handset down and turned to face the room. His eyes found Kincaid, then moved to Catherine, and something flickered in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or hope. Status, Kincaid demanded. The storm triggered a power fluctuation, Whitmore said, his voice clipped and professional despite the crisis. Main antenna array took the surge. Not a direct lightning strike, but close enough. The primary communications relay dropped to partial function. We're trying to route everything through the backup chain, but it's choking. On one of the screens, Catherine could see the problem spelled out in simple, brutal terms. The transponder signal from the inbound C-130 was blinking in and out, appearing for a few seconds, then vanishing, like a candle flame in the wind. The tower radio crackled through overhead speakers, distorted and breaking up. Coronado Tower, this is Cargo Flight Nighthawk 7. Repeat, do you read? You are breaking up. Turbulence is severe. Fuel margins are tightening. Request immediate vectors. No response from the tower. The duty officer there was trying, but without a stable communications link, he might as well have been shouting into the void. The airman at the secondary console turned in his chair, eyes wide with fear. Ma'am, the system is also mislogging ground vehicle positions. The storm corrupted the automated tracking updates. If we need emergency vehicles at the runway, we won't know who's where. Voices overlapped in the room, suggestions and complaints in half-formed plans colliding with no clear direction. The officer on duty flipped through a technical manual like it might hold answers for a scenario the writers had never imagined. No one was clearly in charge. No one was making the decisions that needed to be made. Catherine had seen chaos before. She had seen it in combat information centers when missiles were inbound and seconds mattered. She had seen it on bridges when ships were too close and collisions seemed inevitable. She had learned a long time ago that chaos only killed you if you let it. She looked at the failing screens, at the frozen faces, at the storm outside smashing against windows like it was trying to break through. And she made a choice. The kind of choice that would end her operation and reveal everything. But some things mattered more than staying hidden. Catherine stepped forward, and when she spoke, her voice cut through the noise like a blade through fog. Reroute tower traffic to frequency 284.7. Now. Every head in the room turned toward her. Senior Chief Whitmore, I need a physical check on the backup antenna chain. Not just what the screen says. I want eyes on every connection from the relay hub to the tower input. Her voice wasn't asking. It was commanding, direct, absolute. Get Master Chief Dalton on a generator line to this building within 3 minutes. We cannot afford another voltage dip. The duty officer started to speak. We can't just change frequencies without... Catherine cut him off, her voice like steel wrapped in ice. The tower has multi-band capability. They can shift to 284.7 as an alternate approach frequency. The aircraft can too. The current channel is compromised by storm interference. We need a cleaner band that's still within their onboard preset range. The officer stared at her. How do you know? Because I watched an entire carrier strike group nearly lose a replenishment flight over the Persian Gulf when we hesitated 30 seconds, arguing about protocol instead of acting, Catherine said. Call the tower. Now. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Whitmore grabbed his toolkit and headed for the equipment racks. The duty officer reached for his phone with hands that shook slightly. Kincaid stood frozen, watching Catherine with an expression that mixed shock and dawning realization. Catherine moved to the communications console, her fingers finding keys and switches with the confidence of someone who had done this 100 times before. The young airman slid his chair back, giving her access without even thinking about it. Patch me into tower frequency, Catherine said. The airman connected the circuit. Catherine took the headset, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of command that came from years of making life and death decisions in the dark. Coronado Tower, this is Coronado Actual. Switch to frequency 284.7 for approach communications. Acknowledge. There was a pause, static-filled, intense. Then the tower operator's voice came through, strained but functioning. Coronado Actual, tower copies. Switching to 284.7. The frequency band changed on the screens. Almost immediately, the interference cleared, the signal strengthening as they moved away from the compromised channel. Catherine keyed the mic again. Cargo Flight Nighthawk 7, this is Coronado Actual. Switch to approach frequency 284.7. Acknowledge. More static. Then the pilot's voice, clearer than it had been in minutes. Coronado Actual, Nighthawk 7, switching to 284.7. A few seconds passed, then the pilot came back and Catherine could hear the relief in his voice, even through the distortion. Coronado Actual, Nighthawk 7, reading you 5x5 now. Fuel stayed at 2,400 pounds. Weather is severe. Request immediate vectors for approach. Catherine's voice stayed calm, professional. The voice of someone who had guided aircraft through worse conditions than this. Nighthawk 7, Coronado Actual copies. Your position is 15 miles southwest, altitude 3,000 feet. Come right to heading 045. Descend to 1,500 feet. Wind is 320 at 45 knots, gusting to 65. Expect severe turbulence in the final 5 miles. Runway 29er is clear. ILS is degraded but functional. You are cleared for approach. We will guide you every mile. Roger, Coronado Actual, coming right to 045, descending to 1500. Whitmore's voice came over the internal communication system. Bypass the worst segment of the backup antenna chain. Signal strength should be improving. On the screens, the transponder return from Nighthawk 7 solidified, became steady and trackable. The phone rang. The duty officer answered it, listened, then called out. Master Chief Dalton has a generator tied into our building power. We've got stable voltage. Catherine allowed herself one small breath of relief. Then she was back on the radio, guiding the aircraft through the storm with the precision of someone who had done this in combat, who had vectored fighters through surface-to-air missile coverage and brought them home against odds that should have killed them. Lieutenant Commander Vance appeared in the doorway of the communications hub. He took in the scene with one sweep of his eyes, saw Catherine at the console with the headset, saw the way everyone in the room was following her commands without question. Their eyes met across the room. Vance nodded once, then moved to a secondary station and started feeding her updated position data without being asked. For 15 minutes, Catherine talked that aircraft through the storm. Her voice never wavered, never showed doubt or fear. She gave vectors and altitudes and wind corrections with the calm certainty of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. At one point, her mind flashed back to another night, another storm, 3 years ago in the Gulf. 2 FA-18s that didn't come back. Voices on the radio that went silent and stayed silent. The weight of command when command meant watching good people die and knowing you had sent them there. Not tonight, she thought. Not tonight. Nighthawk 7, you are 1 mile from threshold. Continue descent. Cleared to land runway 29er. A pause that felt like hours. Then the pilot's voice, steady and grateful. Coronado Actual, Nighthawk 7, runway in sight, landing. Another pause. Nighthawk 7 is down safe. Coronado Actual, you just saved 6 lives in a $90 million aircraft. Thank you. The communications hub erupted. Someone cheered. Someone else clapped. A young petty officer who had been holding her breath for the last 10 minutes let it out in a rush that sounded like a sob. Catherine took off the headset and handed it back to the duty officer with hands that were perfectly steady. Log the frequency change and the weather impact accurately, she said quietly. So when people up the chain read this later, they'll know what actually happened. Not just that the job got done. The duty officer nodded mutely, still staring at her like he was trying to solve an impossible equation. Kincaid approached slowly, her face pale. Where did you learn to do that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Had worse in the Gulf, ma'am, Catherine said. Different frequency, same storm. I just hate seeing good people lose because of bad wiring and old habits. Kincaid opened her mouth to say something else, but before she could, the door banged open and Captain Roger Hastings stumbled in, soaked from the rain, his face a mask of devastation. He looked around the room until his eyes found Catherine. Then he straightened his shoulders and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. Admiral Brennan, he said, I need to confess something. The room went dead silent. Catherine felt every eye turn toward her, felt the moment crystallize, become something that couldn't be taken back. Captain Hastings, she said carefully. I falsified supply records, he said, the words coming out like they were being torn from him. I sold government equipment on the black market. Antenna relays, vehicle parts, electronics, everything that should have kept this base running. He was shaking now, but he didn't stop. But I didn't sell the antenna relay that was supposed to go to communications. I was going to. I had a buyer lined up. But tonight, listening to you on that radio, hearing what real leadership sounds like, his voice broke. I'm the reason you almost lost that aircraft. I'm the reason people almost died." Kincaid made a small sound, something between shock and fury. Hastings turned to her. "My daughter has cancer, Grace, stage 3. The treatment costs more than my salary can cover, more than insurance will pay. I needed money and I didn't know what else to do." He looked back at Catherine, tears mixing with rain on his face. "But that's not an excuse. I put lives at risk. I compromised readiness. I dishonored my oath." He straightened to attention. "I'm ready to face whatever consequences you decide, ma'am." Catherine stood very still, her mind running through options and outcomes. She could feel Vance watching her, could feel Kincaid and Whitmore, and every sailor in the room waiting to see what kind of officer she really was. "Captain Hastings," she said finally, "you will face court-martial. That's not my choice to make or unmake. Justice demands accountability." Hastings nodded, accepting it. "But," Catherine continued, "I will recommend clemency consideration based on your daughter's medical situation, and I will personally ensure that she receives full treatment through Walter Reed Medical Center. The Navy will cover all costs." Hastings stared at her. "Why would you do that?" "Because I'm fixing the system that puts you in an impossible position," Catherine said. "Because we punish crimes, but we don't abandon families. Because that's the Navy my father believed in when he died. And that's the Navy we're going to be." The silence stretched for another long moment. Then Whitmore spoke up, his voice rough. "Ma'am, who are you really?" Catherine looked around the room, at faces she had come to know over 7 days of working beside them, listening to them, understanding their frustrations and their hopes, and the quiet ways they kept fighting, even when the system gave them every reason to quit. "You'll find out tomorrow morning," she said quietly. "Formation is at 0800. I suggest everyone get some rest. We have a lot of work ahead of us." She walked out of the communications hub and into the storm, rain soaking through her clothes in seconds. Behind her, she could hear voices rising in speculation and shock, but she didn't look back. She had one more call to make. In her quarters, water dripping from her hair and pooling on the floor, Catherine pulled out her encrypted phone and dialed Harrison's number. He answered immediately. "Tell me you didn't just do what I think you did." "The aircraft is down safe," Catherine said. "Everyone's alive. The mission succeeded. And your cover is blown." "Yes, sir." Harrison was quiet for a long moment. "Your father would have done the same thing, Kat. He never could stand by and watch people die when he had the power to stop it." "I know." "Tomorrow's going to be interesting." "Yes, sir." "Make it count, Admiral. Make it count." Catherine hung up and sat on the edge of her narrow bed, still dripping, still processing everything that had just happened. Through the window, she could see the storm beginning to break apart, the rain easing, the clouds starting to tear open to reveal patches of stars. Tomorrow she would put on her uniform for the first time in a week. Tomorrow she would stand before the base in dress whites and watch recognition dawn on hundreds of faces. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, she had saved 6 lives and a $90 million aircraft. Tonight, she had proven to herself and to everyone watching that leadership wasn't about rank or stars or the uniform you wore. It was about making the hard call when the hard call needed to be made, regardless of the cost. Catherine lay back on the bed, closed her eyes, and waited for morning to come. Dawn came cold and clear. The storm washed away like a bad dream. Catherine stood in her quarters holding her dress white uniform, the fabric crisp and perfect, untouched for 7 days. The 2 stars on the shoulder boards caught the early light and threw it back like small suns. She laid the uniform on the bed and looked at the photograph on her desk. Her father in his flight suit, grinning beside his FA-18. Commander Jack Brennan, who had walked through that gate 34 years ago and never walked back out. "I did it, Dad," she said quietly to the photograph. "I saw them, really saw them, and now I'm going to fix it." She dressed slowly, deliberately, each button fastened with precision, each ribbon aligned to regulation. the Navy Cross on her chest, earned in the Gulf when she'd brought ships home through fire, the Defense Superior Service Medal, the Combat Action Ribbon, Expert Marksman Badge, and finally, the 2 stars. She pulled out her encrypted phone one last time. Harrison answered on the first ring. "Cat, it's time, Hawk. Your father would burst with pride if he could see you right now." "I hope he can," Catherine said softly. "Today you show them who you are. Tomorrow you show them what you're going to build." "Yes, sir." "Make it count, Admiral. The whole Navy is watching." Catherine ended the call, took one last look in the mirror, and walked out into the morning. The parade field at Naval Support Base Coronado had been built in the 1960s, back when the Navy believed in ceremony and tradition mattered. 800 personnel stood in formation now, boots in perfect lines, faces forward, wondering why they'd been summoned at 0800 on a Saturday morning. Speculation ran through the ranks like electricity. "New CO from Washington," someone whispered. "Heard it's an admiral," another voice added. "Some hotshot from the Pentagon." Near the front, Sergeant Merrick stood at attention, his earlier smugness replaced by nervous energy. "Probably another paper pusher who's never been to sea," he muttered to the sailor beside him. At the main gate, Petty Officer Sloan adjusted his dress blues for the 3rd time. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. He kept thinking about the woman he'd waved through 7 days ago, about how he'd laughed and called her a paper pusher, about how he'd bet she'd be crying in 2 weeks. In the motor pool section, Master Chief Dalton stood with his mechanics, all of them in their dress uniforms for the first time in months. His memorial bracelet caught the sunlight. CPO Robert Dalton, Beirut, 1983. His father would have loved this moment, would have understood what was about to happen. Major Kincaid stood near the front with the other senior officers, her face pale. She hadn't slept. Kept replaying the moment in the communications hub when that quiet clerk had taken command like she'd been born to it. Admiral Brennan. The name had circled her mind all night like a shark. Lieutenant Commander Vance stood perfectly still, a small, knowing smile on his face. He'd kept her secret. He'd chosen honor over ambition, and in a few minutes everyone would know why. The band struck up, anchors away. "Attention on deck," the Master of Ceremonies called out. "Prepare for the arrival of the incoming commanding officer, Rear Admiral Catherine Brennan." 800 pairs of eyes turned toward the main entrance, and from the side of the field, where no one had been looking, she appeared. Catherine Brennan walked onto the parade field in full dress whites, and the morning seemed to hold its breath. Every ribbon sat precisely where it belonged. Every medal caught the light. The 2 admiral stars on her shoulders blazed like they were on fire. Her face was calm, composed, the face of someone who had made this walk 1,000 times in her mind and knew exactly what it meant. The recognition wave hit like a physical force. Sloane's face drained of color. His hand rose to salute and stayed there, trembling, as tears started streaming down his face. The woman he'd dismissed, the woman he'd laughed about, walking toward him wearing stars. Merrick dropped his coffee cup. It shattered on the asphalt, forgotten. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. Kincaid's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. The clerk who'd worked beside her, the woman who'd stayed late helping Thatcher, the one who'd asked better questions than most officers, standing there wearing the Navy Cross. Dalton stood straighter than he had in years, his chest swelling with something between pride and shame. She'd known about the Mark V's. She'd understood the motor pool, because she'd commanded in combat, because she was real Navy. Senior Chief Whitmore couldn't stop staring. The woman who'd understood circuit boards and antenna arrays without being told, who'd known which parts were critical and which could wait, standing there wearing stars earned in the Gulf. Captain Stratton, who'd barely looked at her a week ago, stood frozen. The quiet transfer who'd asked about his father's rifle, who'd listened when he talked about standards, wearing a chest full of medals that put his career to shame. And every face that had once laughed, doubted, or ignored her now stared in collective shock as the woman they'd brushed aside walked toward the podium as the Admiral who would command them all. Catherine's boots struck the asphalt in perfect rhythm. She passed Sloane, and his salute never wavered despite the tears. She passed Merrick, and the sergeant stood at attention with his eyes forward, face burning with shame and something deeper. She reached the podium and turned to face the formation. 800 sailors. 800 faces she'd come to know in 7 days. 800 people who had no idea they'd been tested, and most of them had passed. She raised her hand in salute. The sound of 800 boots striking the ground together echoed across the field like thunder rolling over calm water. The announcer's voice carried over the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, Rear Admiral Catherine Brennan, assuming command of Naval Support Base Coronado. Catherine held the salute, her eyes moving across the formation, and then she lowered her hand and stepped to the microphone. Catherine let the silence stretch for 5 full seconds. Let them look at her. Let the weight of recognition settle on every shoulder in that formation. When she spoke, her voice carried across the field without strain, calm and clear and absolutely certain. I spent 7 days on this base as a logistics clerk named Catherine Monroe, she said. No rank, no uniform, no authority except what I could earn through work. A murmur rippled through the formation. I wanted to see this base the way you see it every morning, without filters, without ceremony, without anyone performing for the Admiral. She paused. I wanted to see the truth. The murmur died. Every face leaned forward slightly, drawn in. And I saw frustration, Catherine continued. I saw good people drowning in bad systems. I saw vehicles that don't move, and communications gear that doesn't communicate, and supply chains that don't supply anything except excuses. Heads nodded, unconscious agreement. But I also saw something else. She let that hang in the air. I saw Master Chief Dalton refuse to sign false paperwork because integrity mattered more than convenience. I saw him fight for his vehicles and his people, even when nobody above him seemed to care. Dalton's jaw clenched. His eyes glistened, but he didn't look away. I saw Senior Chief Whitmore warn about communications failures for months. Saw him keep ancient equipment running through skill and determination because he understood that when we fail, people die. Whitmore stood taller, pride and vindication mixing on his face. I saw Major Kincaid work 80-hour weeks because she couldn't abandon her people, even when the system abandoned her. Kincaid's tears finally spilled over, but she didn't wipe them away. I saw Seaman Thatcher stay until midnight fixing errors that weren't his fault because he refused to let his team down. Thatcher, standing in the junior enlisted ranks, straightened his shoulders like he'd just been given a medal. I saw people who still believed, Catherine said, her voice strengthening, who still cared, who kept showing up day after day, even when the system gave them every reason to quit. She paused, and her voice dropped to something quieter, but harder. That's the Navy I joined. That's the Navy my father died for. Every face locked onto hers. 33 years ago, Commander Jack Brennan flew an FA-18 Hornet off this coast. February 1991. Desert storm. He was 32 years old. He had a wife and a 3-year-old daughter. He believed the Navy stood for something bigger than any one person. Honor, duty, taking care of our people. Catherine's voice didn't waver, but something in her eyes showed the cost of the words. He never came home. I don't remember his face, but I remember my mother crying. I remember the cold television screen under my hand, and I remember deciding that I would join the Navy to understand what he thought was worth dying for. Absolute silence across the field. I learned that he died believing officers would lead with honor, that systems would support sailors, not strangle them, that the Navy would always take care of its people. Her voice hardened to steel. This base forgot that, but starting today, we remember. She let those words settle like a hammer fall. From this moment forward, we fix problems before they become excuses. We hold each other accountable because we care. We expect excellence because we will provide the tools for it. Lieutenant Colonel Stratton, the base XO who dismissed her a week ago, stepped forward. His right hand came up in a salute that was sharp, deliberate, and full of something that hadn't been there before. Respect earned, not given. Catherine returned it, holding his gaze with a small nod. And then, like a wave breaking, the formation followed. One by one, then all at once, 800 hands rose in salute. "Well said, Admiral Brennan." The voice came from the back of the formation, deep and carrying, with the authority of someone who'd commanded fleets and expected to be heard. Every head turned. Walking onto the parade field in dress whites, with 4 stars blazing on his shoulders, came Admiral William Harrison. 71 years old and still carrying himself like the submarine captain he'd been 50 years ago. His chest held decorations from 4 decades of service, from the Cold War through Desert Storm and beyond. Catherine's eyes widened. Admiral Harrison? Harrison came to attention and saluted her. Sharp, perfect, the salute of a senior officer honoring a junior who'd earned it. "Permission to join the ceremony, Admiral?" he asked formally. Catherine returned the salute. "Granted, sir." Harrison walked to the podium and took the microphone. "I knew Commander Jack Brennan," he said, his voice filling the field. "Served with him on the USS Missouri in 1990. Flew with him. Trusted him with my life. And when his daughter came to me 6 weeks ago with a plan to go undercover on this base, I saw her father's fire in her eyes." He turned to look at Catherine. Admiral Brennan could have taken command from an office in Norfolk, could have sent inspectors, could have fired people from 3,000 miles away. He paused. Instead, she walked your decks, ate your food, heard your complaints, fixed your problems beside you in the dark. His voice grew stronger. She did that because she wanted to know you before she led you. That's not just good leadership, that's exceptional character. He faced the formation again. And last night when that storm hit and systems failed, and an aircraft full of sailors needed saving, she proved why she's the youngest Rear Admiral in the history of the United States Navy. Harrison stepped back and saluted Catherine again. "The honor is mine, Admiral. The honor is all of ours." Catherine stepped back to the microphone, composure perfect despite the emotion threatening to break through. "This command succeeds because of the people who refused to quit when quitting was easy," she said. "Colonel Grace Kincaid, front and center." Kincaid marched forward, boots striking the ground in sharp rhythm. She stopped 3 paces from the podium and saluted. Catherine returned it with precision, then pulled a set of Colonel's Eagles from her pocket. "This officer held the line when the systems around her broke," Catherine said clearly. "She fought for her people at the cost of her own health and peace of mind." Effective immediately, Colonel Grace Kincaid, Director of Logistics Reform Initiative. She pinned the new rank on Kincaid's shoulders. The formation erupted in applause. Kincaid's voice broke as she tried to speak. "Thank you, ma'am. You earned it, Grace. Now teach others what you know." Next, Catherine called, "Master Chief Marcus Dalton." Dalton marched forward, his memorial bracelet visible on his wrist. "CPO Robert Dalton, Beirut, 1983. This chief refused to compromise standards for convenience," Catherine said. "His integrity kept people safe. Master Chief Dalton, you are hereby appointed Base Maintenance Officer. Every vehicle on this base will move because you make it move." Dalton's voice was thick with emotion. "My father would be proud, ma'am." "So would mine, Master Chief." Senior Chief Daniel Whitmore. Whitmore approached with barely contained energy. "This sailor warned us for months about equipment failures. Nobody listened. I listened." Catherine's voice carried across the field. "Last night proved he was right. Senior Chief Whitmore, Director of Communications Infrastructure. You will rebuild these systems to the standard the fleet deserves." Whitmore grinned despite himself. "We're going to make this the most connected base in the Navy, ma'am." "I know you will. Finally, Catherine's eyes found Vance in the formation. Commander James Vance, front and center. Vance stepped forward, uncertainty flickering across his face. Catherine held his gaze as she spoke. This officer had every reason to expose me, to sabotage this operation. He expected this command. I took it. She paused. He discovered my identity midweek. Gasps rippled through the formation. He could have ended everything, could have ruined the mission. Instead, when crisis came, he stood beside me in that communications hub and helped save 6 lives. She pulled out a promotion warrant and a set of commander's oak leaves. He chose honor over ambition, duty over pride. Commander James Vance, you are promoted to full commander and appointed executive officer of Naval Support Base Coronado. Vance's eyes widened. Catherine pinned the new rank and extended her hand. Thank you for giving me the chance to prove myself, James. Vance shook her hand firmly. Thank you for the chance to believe again, Admiral. The applause was deafening. Catherine raised her hand and the field fell silent. One final matter, she said, her voice harder now. Captain Roger Hastings falsified supply records and sold government equipment, antenna relays, vehicle parts, electronics that should have kept this base operational. She gestured toward the edge of the field where Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents stood waiting. He will face court-martial. Justice demands accountability. Hastings stood in the formation, tears streaming down his face, but standing at attention with what dignity he had left. But, Catherine continued, and her voice softened slightly, Captain Hastings' teenage daughter is fighting cancer. Stage 3. Treatment costs exceed what any family should bear alone. She looked directly at Hastings. I have arranged for her complete treatment at Walter Reed Medical Center. The United States Navy will cover all costs. Her fight is our fight. Hastings' legs nearly buckled. Because we punish crimes, Catherine said to the formation, but we don't abandon families. We hold people accountable, but we also take care of our own. That's the Navy my father believed in. That's the Navy we're going to be. The applause this time was different, quieter, more thoughtful. The sound of people understanding that justice and compassion weren't opposites. Catherine took a breath and looked across the 800 faces one more time. From this day forward, she said, her voice ringing clear, we fix what's broken. We reward what's right. We expect excellence because we provide the tools for it. We demand accountability because we care about each other. She paused, then delivered the final line. This base will be the standard the entire fleet measures itself against. Not because I ordered it, because you make it so. Harrison stepped beside her and saluted. Vance joined them, his hand rising, sharp and precise. Kincaid, Dalton, Whitmore, all moving forward to stand with Catherine, all saluting. And then the entire formation, 800 hands rose as one. 800 boots struck the ground together with a sound like artillery fire. The Navy hymn began to play, brass instruments lifting the melody into the morning air, and the sound mixed with the crash of boots and the rustle of wind off the Pacific, and created something that felt less like a ceremony and more like a promise being made and sealed. Sloan stood at the gate with his hand raised, tears streaming openly down his face, his salute perfect and unwavering. The woman he'd dismissed, the woman he'd laughed about. The Admiral who'd seen everything and was going to fix it all. Merrick saluted with his jaw clenched, shame and determination mixing on his face. He'd mocked her. He'd underestimated her. He would never make that mistake again. Stratton saluted with new respect, thinking about his father's rifle and the standards that had mattered once and would matter again. Thatcher saluted, knowing that someone had seen him drowning and pulled him out and given him hope. Catherine stood at the podium and returned every salute she could see. One deliberate motion that encompassed the entire formation, the entire base, the entire promise she was making. The hymn reached its final note. The last echo of 800 boots faded across the harbor like a promise kept. And in that moment, under the California sun, with the wind carrying the scent of salt water and new beginnings, Naval Support Base Coronado stopped being broken and started being whole again. 6 months later, Naval Support Base Coronado no longer looked like a place that was slowly dying. The warehouses ran with the precision of clockwork. Colonel Kincaid's logistics reforms had become the model the entire Pacific Fleet studied. Every shipment tracked, every item accountable, every sailor trained to standards that other bases envied. The motor pool gleamed. Master Chief Dalton's vehicle sat in perfect rows, everyone operational, maintenance logs updated daily. His team had cut average repair time by 60%. The metrics that had once embarrassed the base now led the region. Senior Chief Whitmore's communications hub hummed with new equipment, redundant systems, and a technical staff that knew their gear inside and out. 100 days of 100% uptime. The record stood unbroken. Commander Vance ran staff meetings with quiet confidence, respected by every officer who worked for him. He'd found what his brother would have wanted him to find, a command worth believing in. And in a military hospital 3,000 miles away, Captain Roger Hastings sat beside his daughter's bed. She was in remission. The Navy had kept its word. When he returned to serve his sentence, he would do so knowing his daughter would live. Justice and mercy had somehow existed in the same moment. The base that had once been a punchline in Pentagon briefings was now the example other commanders wanted to follow. Senators visited. Journalists wrote features. Admiral Harrison himself came back twice to see what Catherine had built. But the change that mattered most wasn't in the metrics or the press releases. It was in the way sailors walked through the gate each morning with their backs straight and their eyes forward, believing that their work mattered and their leaders cared. It was in the way problems got solved instead of buried, the way people spoke up instead of shutting down, the way excellence became expected instead of exceptional. It was in the memorial wall where a new plaque had been added. Commander Jack Ironside 6 Brennan, 1959 to 1991, Desert Storm. A father who believed in honor, a sailor who gave everything. His daughter still does. Catherine stood before that memorial wall in the early evening, alone, the base quiet around her. She touched her father's name with one finger, tracing the letters like she was memorizing them again. "We did it, Dad," she said quietly. "We made them believe again." Footsteps approached behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know it was Harrison. "Your father would have loved to see this, Cat," the old Admiral said, coming to stand beside her. "Would have been proud beyond words." "I hope he's seeing it, Hawk." "He is. I'm sure of it." They stood in silence for a moment, two officers separated by 35 years and 4 stars, but united by the same belief that the Navy was worth fighting for. "You ready for what comes next?" Harrison asked. "They're talking about giving you the Pacific Surface Fleet." Catherine smiled slightly. "One base at a time, Hawk. Let's make sure this one stays fixed first." They turned and walked toward the headquarters building together, the California sun setting behind them, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. At the main gate, Sloan stood his watch with perfect posture, checking IDs with care, treating every sailor with respect. When he saw Admiral Brennan walking with Admiral Harrison, his hand snapped to his forehead in a salute that was sharp and proud. Catherine returned it with precision. The American flag snapped in the wind over the harbor, where ships moved with purpose, and sailors worked with pride, and a base that had been dying was now fully, completely alive. They had underestimated the Admiral. She had proven them all wrong. And in doing so, she had given them something more valuable than vindication. She had given them back their honor.